this presentation, we will discuss threats to internal validity and external validity. I will begin by talking about what internal validity is, some strengths of internal validity, and threats to internal validity. Then I will discuss external validity and its strengths as well as threats. After watching this video, if you would like more information, this topic is discussed in Chapter 4 of your textbook. Validity is the extent to which a conclusion, such as the results from your study, is reasonably accurate or approaches the truth. There are 4 types of validity discussed in your textbook, and they are construct validity, statistical validity, and then the 2 we will be focusing on today, which are internal and external validity. So, remember that validity is concerned with determining the accuracy and truthfulness of results from a research study. Now let's talk about internal validity. Internal validity is the accuracy of a study's results to show a cause and effect relation. For example, if we want to study whether sleep relates to exam scores, having internal validity would mean the amount of sleep causes exam scores. In order to establish whether a study's results have internal validity, the study must meet the following 3 criteria. The first criteria is to establish temporal precedence. So, if we continue with our example, this just means that sleep must have preceded or come before the exam scores in time. The second criteria is called covariation. Covariation is when participants in the experimental condition show the effect, while participants in the control condition do not. The final criterion to have internal validity is to eliminate any third variables or alternate explanations for the relation between sleep and exam scores. In this example, amount of study time could be a third variable. Now that we have covered what internal validity is, let's discuss some potential threats to internal validity. One threat to internal validity is history, or an event that occurs prior to the study that may alter the results of the study. In this case, it may seem like amount of sleep caused exam scores in all participants. However, the participants may have been exposed to some other variable prior to or during the study that actually caused the scores on the exam. This relates back to the problem of eliminating third variables or alternate explanations. The next threat to internal validity is known as maturation. Maturation is any change in the participant that occurs during the time that a study takes place. This can be a common issue in longitudinal research where data is being collected over days, weeks, months, or even years. Another threat to internal validity is testing. Some studies are set up in a pre-test, post-test format where participants will take an initial test so the researchers can get a baseline measure. Then, towards the end of the study, researchers will give the same or a very similar test at the end of the study to measure any change. However, if there is not enough time in between the tests, participants may be producing results because of being exposed to the test previously, rather than as a result of the independent variable that the researchers were interested in. The fourth threat to internal validity is instrumentation, or improper or inconsistent use of a measurement instrument. This can also occur as a result of the participant experiencing fatigue from a long study session. Another threat to internal validity is statistical regression, which is the tendency for extreme scores, also known as outliers, to move towards the mean. For example, if a person scores very low on the pretest, it is expected that the participant will score better on a subsequent post-test. The next threat to internal validity is mortality, also known as attrition, or the loss of subjects during the study. Researchers refer to mortality as any reason why a participant may no longer be able to be involved in the study, either voluntarily or involuntarily. The final threat to internal validity is selection. This may occur when a researcher groups participants and the results of the study are due to some naturally occurring characteristic of the group rather than the manipulation of the independent variable. Although there are many factors that can weaken internal validity, there are several ways researchers can strengthen the potential for that cause and effect relation between the independent variable and the dependent variable. The first method for strengthening internal validity is to standardize the study conditions. This means that researchers should make sure the study environment and other conditions are identical for each participant in the study. The second method used to strengthen internal validity is to obtain as much information as possible from the participants in the study, which could minimize selection errors discussed previously. However, this could lead to participant fatigue, so researchers must find a balance here. The next method is for researchers to obtain as much information about the study conditions as possible. While researchers will want to maintain the study conditions for each participant, there are errors that can occur that researchers should make note of. They should make sure to discuss their study procedures carefully and clearly in their methods section in order for future research studies to replicate. Another method is for researchers to choose the appropriate research design that will answer their research question most effectively. For example, if a researcher is interested in changes over time, they should conduct a longitudinal study rather than a cross-sectional study. The final method for strengthening internal validity is for researchers to use a control group when appropriate. This will help researchers to rule out any third variables or alternate explanations for results. Now that we have covered internal validity and its threats and strengths, let's move on to discuss external validity. External validity is the extent to which the results of your study can be generalized to other populations or settings. For example, if you are interested in learning about how hours of sleep relates to exam scores, you will likely want to gather a sample of individuals that are representative of the population, which are students. As touched on previously, one issue that can be a threat to external validity is representativeness of a sample to the overall population. Your sample should represent the variety of characteristics present in the total population and take these into account when considering a causal relation between the independent variable and the dependent variable. In addition, researchers should make sure the setting of their study is realistic and representative to the context that the results will be generalized to. Another threat to external validity is testing. You will recall that this was also a threat to internal validity. Here, testing is an issue in the sense that in the real world, there will typically not be a pretest, so results must be generalizable to the context where a pretest does not occur. Selection, which was also a threat to internal validity, is a threat to external validity too. Again, participants may vary on certain traits that could interact with the results of a research study, reducing the generalizability of these results. A final threat to external validity is experimentation or experimenter effects. These are characterized by the participant being influenced by the fact that they are a part of a study or by experimenter-directed responses during measurement. This relates to observer bias, where participants will answer in a way that they believe they should due to the observer or experimenter expectations, rather than answering truthfully. Next, I will cover some methods to strengthen external validity. External validity may be strengthened by the research design. More specifically, if a researcher can avoid a pretest post-test design, this will strengthen generalizability of a study because pretests typically do not occur in real-world settings. Generalizability is also improved in a field experiment research design, where researchers observe the naturally occurring relation between the independent variable and the dependent variable. If the study must occur in a lab setting, it is important that researchers use a control or placebo group to ensure that the results of their study are due to the manipulation of the independent variable rather than due to other third variables. Another way to strengthen external validity is for researchers to use random selection when choosing their sample from the overall population and using random assignment if they choose to assign participants to groups. This can minimize bias in results. Researchers can strengthen external validity by using a blinded research design, where the researcher trains an experimenter who is unaware of the true purpose of the study to collect data. This will minimize experimentation or experimenter effects. Finally, it is important that researchers clearly operationally define their variables of interest. Overall, we discussed internal validity, or the cause and effect relation between two variables, and external validity, which is the generalizability of results to the larger population. Both are important for researchers to be sure the results of their study are accurate. As you continue working on your assignments for this class, be sure to pay attention to when the researcher discusses ways that they have strengthened internal and external validity in their research study. Alternatively, be sure to look out for instances where the researchers may have threatened the internal and external validity of their results. Assessing internal and external validity is key in reviewing any form of scientific research.